Gonna start?
Hi, so this is Dr. Sanchez. We should be getting started at any moment. I'm just getting control of the slides and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So good evening. This is Dr. JP Sanchez. It's a pleasure having you all join us today for this webinar entitled Writing a Letter to the Editor, an Opportunity to Publish for Medical Students and Residents. I'm grateful that Ms. Mary Beth DeVilbiss,
yep.
DeVilbiss has joined us. She serves as the managing editor of Academic Medicine. I also have the privilege of serving on the editorial board of Academic Medicine and working with her, as well as serving as an editor for AAMC Medit Portal. So thank you again for joining us today. I just wanted to give a quick reminder of BNGAP. BNGAP stands for Building the Next Generation of Academic Physicians. For those who are not aware, the mission of BNGAP is to really help diverse medical students and residents become more aware of academic medicine as a career option, and to help medical students, residents, and even fellows gain greater interest and preparedness for an academic medicine career. I'm just going to ask for individuals on the call if you could just mute your phone to reduce the background noise. Great. Thank you. Let me just do this. Okay. So often you may have heard me say that I want you to be a faculty member, and this is something that I often tell medical students and residents because as a community, we really don't express that call to them as much as we really need to. We know that since 2010, there's been an explosion of new medical schools, close to 14 new medical schools with about another 8 seeking LCME accreditation. And with that explosion of medical schools, there's a great need to build our faculty base or increase the number of future applicants for the faculty ranks and for the senior ranks. As we look at the current academic medicine workforce, what we've come to realize is that historically there's been a lack of great diversity. For example, we know that underrepresented racial ethnic minorities represent 30% of the US population, but only represent about 16% of our medical students. And when we look at their representation amongst faculty, only about 7% of faculty at allopathic medical schools identify as Black, Hispanic, or Native American. As a community, we've reached parity in terms of women in medical school, but women only represent 40% of our faculty. And with emerging data by sexual orientation and gender identity, we know that about 8% of our medical students identify along the LGBT spectrum or the SGM spectrum, which is comparable to their representation in the general population. But we still have not collected similar data amongst our faculty to know the level of sexual and gender minority diversity amongst our faculty base. There's other recent research that I just want to highlight. There was an article by Dr. Jeff and Dr. Andriol entitled Reaping What We Sow, the Emerging Academic Medicine Workforce, that found that URM medical students in particular, and in comparison to non-URM medical students, express less interest in medical school, in becoming a future faculty, not only at graduation, but actually on starting medical school. So on starting medical school, URM medical students are less interested in academic careers, and that disinterest or lack of interest continues over 4 years and is not regained at graduation. And as many of you know, it is quite challenging to have our residents think about serving as future faculty. These photos that are emerging are photos of individuals who have been very active with BINGAP in working with our medical students and residents and encouraging them to have an increased interest in academic medicine careers. The collection of 28 photos are of medical students, residents, fellows, and faculty who have contributed to a collection of modules to help medical students and residents gain greater awareness and preparedness for future academic medicine careers. And the 10 modules are currently published on Medit Portal for anyone to access. So I just wanted to give mention to that again and applaud their efforts. Here is a listing of the 10 modules, and they range from content on what does diversity and inclusion look like currently in the academic medicine workforce, to translating your educational work to educational scholarship, or similarly translating community-based work to community-based scholarship. So I encourage you to utilize these 10 modules. BINGAP has taken a particular focus on working with Medit Portal and academic medicine and other colleagues to highlight opportunities for medical students and residents to publish because of a fundamental finding that was reported in another paper by Dr. Jeff and Dr. Andriel, which found that publishing during medical school is an important mediator to increasing diverse faculty. And so for us, it was especially important to create an opportunity to remind medical students and residents about this and to give them specific examples of how they could achieve that. And this particular webinar is such an example. So who are you in terms of the participants on this webinar? Well, this reports on some of the findings based on the survey you completed. Actually, 230 people registered. This reports on 211. The overwhelming majority of you are either in academia or as trainees very interested or interested in academic careers. About 69% of you are medical students, with about 20% being residents or fellows. There's great diversity amongst the registrants. Close to 40% identified as white, 17% as Hispanic, 17% as Black, 26% as Asian, close to 60% identify as women, and about 12% identified along the sexual and gender minority spectrum. And as you know, SGM is becoming a new umbrella term comparable to the LGBT umbrella term. When asked if you were familiar with Medit Portal or academic medicine, the vast majority of you were not familiar with both of these journals. 68% were not familiar with Medit Portal, and 91% reported a lack of familiarity with academic medicine. And when we specifically asked you about which articles you were familiar with or have actually published, the article type that you were most familiar with were original research articles. And that probably goes towards what we're called to present on during medical school. We often pull original research articles to support evidence-based medicine, but still 43% were not familiar. In terms of other types of publications, 78% were not familiar with brief reports, 84% were not familiar with perspectives or commentaries, and the highest proportion were not familiar with letters to the editor. So I'm very grateful that we were able to come together today and discuss how to write a letter to the editor. I just want to further emphasize that given the current socio-political climate, as we are called to stand with each other and to speak up, we also must act. And when we act to see change, it's important to realize and recognize the culture of academic medicine. And one of the core aspects of academic medicine is to realize that publishing is capital. And when you're able to publish a perspective, people listen differently and they react differently. And it's so important not only to stand and speak, but to pick up the pen or type at your computer and get your perspective or the community's perspective out there in a different way, in a way that we're accustomed to reading and discussing important topics. So as mentioned, I'm grateful and honored that Ms. DeVilbiss was able to join us, and she will be now taking over, as well as in inviting our two medical students who recently published letters to the editor to also provide their perspective. As the presentation is going along, please use the comment box to ask questions or pose questions or comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, JP, and thank you for allowing Academic Medicine, the journal, to be represented here. You know, I think that tapping into the next generation of academic physicians is vitally important for the health of our journal. You know, I fully recognize too that you have very limited time and energy to spend on this kind of thing. So I hope that some of the information that I can provide to you today is helpful, and I'm available to answer questions at the end as well, not only about letters to the editor, but anything about the journal. Before we kind of get started on letters to the editor, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about academic medicine in general. This is our mission statement. We are an official peer-reviewed journal of the Association of American Medical Colleges. We serve as an international forum for the exchange of ideas, information, and strategies to address the major challenges facing the academic medicine community as it strives to carry out its missions in the public interest. So as you can see, it's very broad. We do cover the entire spectrum of academic medicine, from undergraduate medical education through graduate medical education, continuing professional development, all kinds of faculty issues, management training issues, things like that. So our audience is very broad. It's a great way, we're a great venue for reaching anyone sort of that you can think of on the academic medicine spectrum. Some brief facts about the journal. Our editor-in-chief is David Sklar. He is an emergency physician affiliated with the University of New Mexico and Arizona State University at the moment. He's been the editor-in-chief since 2012. So we've been working together quite a long time. He is very enthusiastic about featuring the voices of students and residents. I'll get a little more into how he's tried to do that a little bit later in my presentation. But in terms of the characteristics of our journal, we're a monthly, so we publish 12 issues a year, but we publish new content online every week, online ahead of print. And all of our online ahead of print content is always free, no matter whether you have a subscription or not. But you should be able to access all of our content through the institutional subscription through the library at your medical school. So don't forget about that. We receive about 2,000 submissions every year. We are a small staff, so this is a lot for us to power through, but it really is a testament to the breadth of the journal and the respect we have in the community. One of the reflections of that is our current impact factor, which is 4.801. For those of you not familiar, the impact factor is it's a metric that is used in the scholarly publishing community. It kind of is a ratio of the numbers of citations that you receive to the number of articles that you publish. So the higher the number, the higher, you know, the impact of the journal. It's a good tool to use to kind of gauge which journals you might want to submit to, or the reputation of the journal. And I'm proud to say that Academic Medicine is the top journal in our field for the third year in a row, actually. So we're very proud of that, and encourage everyone to kind of check it out if you're not familiar. We also are highly cited, very highly cited, the most highly cited in our field as well. In 2017, we garnered over 14,000 citations to the articles that we published. The editorial focus areas of academic medicine, these apply to letters to the editor, but also, to the entire spectrum of content that we publish. And back to our mission statement, our reach is very broad, and so is our focus. So we're looking at education issues across the spectrum. We are looking at health policy specifically as it relates to the missions of academic medicine. Institutional policy and management at academic medicine institutions, alignment of the workforce with societal needs, so that incorporates issues related to diversity and inclusion as well. The culture and environment of academic medicine, including the learning environment, the intersection of academic medicine's multiple missions, and advancing the field of health professions, education, research, and scholarship. We also publish a wide variety of types of articles. If you were to go to our submission site and start a new submission, you would be given these options as the type of article that you can submit. I think the ones in the left-hand column here, research reports, articles, perspectives, innovation or brief reports, literature reviews, commentaries, those are probably more familiar to you all as sort of traditional avenues of scholarship, especially the research report, as Dr. Sanchez pointed out earlier. The ones in the right-hand column, we won't talk specifically about, but I did want to lift them up. In addition to letters to the editor, we have a number of features that are more based in the humanities. Medicine and the arts, teaching and learning moments are brief vignettes, little essays that sort of communicate a lesson learned from the actor, and cover art, which self-explanatory, is featured on our cover every month. These are other avenues that you might want to explore. They are reflective in nature, and I know a lot of you are already involved in reflective practice in your curriculum anyway. So keeping that in mind for other opportunities for publishing things you're already working on. So, but we are today going to focus on letters to the editor, of course. In general terms, and this is not specific to academic medicine, you'll see a few different types of letter to the editor. So, any journal you pick up, a lot of them have letters to the editor in the very beginning. A lot of the letters you'll see are actually responses to a previously published article. So you read an article, you say, I have something to say about that, and you write a letter to the editor about it. Standalone comments as well, though. If you have an idea or a particular issue that you feel strongly about, writing a letter to the editor is a way to lift that up and get it out there in the literature, make it part of the conversation. There are also letters that can function as brief reports or research letters. These, they are limited in scope, of course, but they have a more traditional research format. So you're looking at methodology and results. Academic medicine does not publish those kinds of letters, but I did want to call attention to one example of a research letter that I think is particularly relevant here. Our editor-in-chief, David Sklar, his very first publication ever, he was a resident, and he published a research letter in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it was really he describes it as a taste test, a blind taste test of antacids. That was his sort of first foray into scholarship, and it was a letter to the editor. So this is a really good example, I think, of how it's kind of a good stepping stone to can be to a long career in academic medicine, and a very robust list of publications under your belt. But back to academic medicine, as I mentioned, not every journal has every type of letter to the editor. Academic medicine does not feature brief reports or research letters. We actually, our letters to the editor are, they need to be focused on issues and ideas. So what we're looking for in letters to the editor are these first three categories. Perhaps a response to a published article, or in the same vein, a reply to another letter. So if you read an article and you say, I have something to contribute here, you write a letter to the editor, and it gets published, the author of that original article is going to be given the opportunity to respond to your letter, especially if it's a critique or some kind of clarification. The idea is to facilitate a dialogue. This is standard practice across the industry. So anytime you write a letter to the editor, it doesn't matter what journal, if it is about someone else's published work, that person will have the opportunity to reply to your letter. It's a really great way to kind of engage with authors, especially if you admire their work or want to learn more or want to voice a concern that you might have in a public forum. The other type is a standalone comment, like I said, just an issue you feel strongly about or a problem that you'd like to describe and put out there for the greater conversation. So some of the characteristics of letters in academic medicine specifically, as I said, no reports of research or programs. That is specific to our journal. I do want to stress that. So if you do have a brief report, please consider letters to the editor in other journals as a venue for getting that published. In academic medicine, letters need to be limited in scope. That means no more than 400 words, including references. With a letter, it's really important to be concise and to get to the point really quickly. You don't have a lot of space to do it, so being sort of judicious about your language and your focus is a really good way to get started there. Letters do not have exhibits, no tables, no figures, no appendices. So you really have just your words to communicate your point. And we ask no more than 3 authors. That's kind of a good rule of thumb for something this limited. It's difficult for more than 3 people to qualify for authorship. We do have guidelines for how you qualify as an author, and for just 400 words, it's really hard for more than 3 people to actually make the contributions that are required to be listed as an author. So why letters to the editor as opposed to other types of publications? As I mentioned before, these are brief and limited in scope. I know you're busy. I know that you are pulled in a lot of different directions. If you have an idea, if you have something that's kind of knocking around in your brain, you maybe don't have time to conduct a longitudinal double-blind study, randomized controlled trial on it, maybe write a letter to the editor. Consider that, whether it's a brief report in another journal or if you just want to lift up that idea, put it out there in the literature. A letter to the editor can be a really great place to get that conversation started, especially if it's novel and hasn't been explored elsewhere. Typically, I want to, really emphasize that word. It's not always the case, I guess, but typically letters to the editor have a much faster publication timeline than a traditional sort of a piece of scholarship. So, at least at academic medicine, a letter to the editor does not go to external peer review. If you're talking about a research letter or a brief report, typically those will go to external review because of the nature of the content. But for a letter that's focused on ideas and issues, at our journal, we have an internal review process for those. So you're not waiting for external reviewers to turn around their comments. You get a decision much faster, and then it gets scheduled for publication much faster. To give you a sense, a typical research report, for example, in academic medicine, the average time from submission to publication is about 10 months. For a letter, it's closer to 4, usually a lot less. And that's just a function of how the production cycle goes. So, the idea is to get the conversation flowing. So if you have something to say, it's going to get out a lot faster in a letter to the editor. And then I think one of the most important aspects is really your own personal voice here. You're from the trenches perspective. In academic medicine, we publish a lot of content from faculty members, doing research and, testing new ideas, and oftentimes learners are guinea pigs, for better or worse. And if you read something and it doesn't ring true to you, or if you read something and you think that it's missing the mark, or focusing on the significant p-values without really getting to the heart of the matter, a letter to the editor is a perfect venue for you to raise your voice and make sure it's heard. Kind of say, you know, this is a great idea maybe, but I've got to say, like, my experience is it's not working. That's a really valuable perspective, and it's not one that gets captured in traditional research all the time. So I mentioned earlier that our editor-in-chief, David Sklar, he is always looking for ways to reach out and lift up trainees' voices. We don't see a lot of submissions from trainees, and so to kind of make space for those and make it clear that we are open to them and looking for them. A couple of years ago, we started issuing a call for trainee authored letters to the editor. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this series, but I want to emphasize that students, residents, and fellows can submit letters or any type of article at any time. You know, the call kind of is a way to spark interest and to let, you know, this work gel around a certain topic, for example. But if you have something to say, you can submit it at any time. You don't have to wait. We'll consider it as we would consider any other submission we receive. But like I said, this dedicated series once a year allows us to showcase your unique perspective in a way that perhaps is missing from the journal in other times of the year. We issue an open call every August. You know, we try to make it coincide with the beginning of the school year before things get too out of hand workload-wise, the accepted letters then are subsequently published in several issues in the following spring and summer issues of the journal. I wanted to kind of sketch out how last year's trainee authored letters to the editor shook out. The call for submissions focused around the theme of transitions and training, and we left that kind of open to interpretation. We ended up receiving 156 submissions. In a typical year, we receive around 100 letters to the editor submissions total, not including these. So you can see that the response is quite robust. It was very interesting to see the distribution between residents and students. It was a little more toward the student side, but in the end, we didn't select these purposefully to equally represent residents and students, but it worked out that way. So we had 30 published letters. They were in our April through June issues of 2018. We ended up having 15 resident authored letters and 15 student authored letters. There we go. The topics that were covered, again, this is all under the umbrella of transitions and training. We had some related to well-being, kind of the transition to duty hours restrictions, burnout research, political activism, various aspects of diversity and inclusion, transitions in curriculum, happiness, social empathy in medical students, community engagement, transitions sort of generally, literal transitions in your training, and then sort of the match and its impact on families. So you can see this was interpreted in a number of different ways, and we're willing to consider sort of any interpretation of the expressed theme. So coming up this year, we will again issue a call for submissions in August. We're thinking about the middle of August. I don't have a date yet, but I will ask Dr. Sanchez to share that with this group when we do have it determined. The submissions will be due in late September. When we do release the call in August, there are a few channels where you can look to find the details. One is our email newsletter. It's called AM Express. It's a free newsletter, and it features all new content every 2 weeks. Our website, academicmedicine.org, our blog, which is AM Rounds, which is accessible from our website. Our Twitter account is @AcadMedJournal. And then other AAMC channels. So if you're involved with any student listservs or anything like that, we'll be promoting the call on those channels as well. Decisions will be conveyed in November, and then again, we'll be publishing the letters in, you know, 3, maybe 4 issues in 2019. So that's the timeline we're looking at for this year's call. If you're inclined to prepare a letter to the editor, either for the call or for any other purpose, I wanted to kind of give some tips and advice. First and foremost, and this is true for any type of submission you prepare for any journal, go to that journal's website and read their instructions for authors. It's eye-opening to see how they define the different parameters for the different types of submissions. It can really help you get in the right frame of mind before you even start writing. Or if you have a manuscript you've prepared and you're not sure where it might fit, that's a good way to kind of retroactively go and understand what type of content the journal is looking for. In the instructions for authors, you can also find details about policies, conflict of interest, things like that apply to all different types of submissions. And I will say that one thing I've learned from talking to authors and reviewers is that poke around a little bit and also take a look at the guidelines for reviewers. Even if you're just an author, looking at what we ask reviewers to do can give you a really more in-depth understanding of how to prepare a good submission. Even for something like a letter that doesn't necessarily go to external peer review, understanding how the journal office is receiving and assessing your submission, I think provides another layer of understanding to authorship in general. I would say, in the future when you become reviewers as well, the same goes, that relationship goes the other way as well. So when you're reviewing a manuscript, when you're a reviewer for a journal, go and read their instructions for authors to understand what the authors have been asked to do. And I think that's a really good little nugget of advice that I've come to understand over the years. But back to letters to the editor specifically, because you have such a limited amount of words to work with, you want to make sure that you state your purpose clearly and state it near the top of the letter. So, I think a lot of, I see a lot of submissions that, they might be maybe a little stylized, or the author wants to save the big reveal for the end of the letter. That's just not an effective way to communicate your message. If we're focusing here again on issues and ideas, we want to make sure that the issue or idea that is the main focus of your letter, that it's featured prominently right at the top there. That'll sort of prime the reader to be ready for your contribution to this conversation. So when you're writing a letter, make sure that main idea or that purpose statement is present in the opening paragraph. Be strategic about using references. Like I said, at Academic Medicine, at least, references do count toward the word limit. So you should support any statements that require support from the literature, but understanding that letters do not require a comprehensive review of the literature by nature. Being very strategic and judicious with what sources you're including is a really good way to save on word count and make sure that you're being concise. I would say too, one of the most important things you can do is cultivate a unique voice. Like I said, you already have a unique perspective as a learner, bringing kind of a slice of life from the trenches kind of lens to some of these big issues that get studied and written about. This goes to the style of writing as well. Letters can be a little more informal. They can be a little more personal. You can pull in personal experience and really make it kind of drive home. That's all okay in a letter. It doesn't have to be very dry or lofty to be a successful submission. So make your voice unique and make it heard. That's completely appropriate in a letter, and it makes for a more compelling submission. When we're reading them, and when readers are reading them, in the published version as well. And then the most important thing, a letter has to add to the conversation. We get a lot of letters submitted that are just kind of like, yeah, me too. Like, I agree with what was already written, which is nice, and we're glad that it's resonating, but that's not making a contribution. That's not adding to the conversation. If you read something and you have a strong reaction to it, make sure that any letter that you write is going a step beyond what's already been said. What are you adding here that's unique and hasn't been said before? I think that's the very most important thing to keep in mind. We can work on a unique voice in editing. We can cut references if it's over the word count, but we can't make something add to the conversation if it doesn't add to the conversation from the beginning. So those are my tips, and I would like to turn it over to my student colleagues who did publish in our 2017, or I guess it was 2018 issues, but from the 2017 call for submissions from students and residents. I'm not sure, Lama, did you want to go first? Or I don't know if you and Max had worked that out.
Yeah, I can go first. Let me just share. Hi. My name is Lama. I am a fourth-year medical student at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, and I am highly interested in academic medicine, hence me being here. I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience with publishing the letter, and I had heard about the opportunity published through the call as well. I had no idea that was something I could do, so it was definitely something that caught my attention. And just sort of going off of the model that Dr. Sanchez has talked about in the beginning, stand, speak, and then act. That's sort of why I didn't know that that's how it went, but that's sort of how my story unveiled as well. So my letter was about introverted medical students, people who are shyer on the floors, and how that may be a hurdle into transitioning into clinical rotations. And so my story started when what my roommate and I were talking, and she was saying how she didn't get a good grade on her medicine rotation, and that kind of prohibited her from high passing the clerkship. So she went back to her grader and asked, why did I get a bad clinical rotation grade? I'm not too sure where I can improve. And her attending said, well, you're very soft spoken, you don't voice yourself very confidently, and just for future, it may be a good idea to be more assertive. So we were talking about it, and that kind of stood up to me that, just because it was sort of her personality and something that we're not really trained in, as per se in medical school, how to be assertive, how to speak confidently, how confident should you be, how much is too much, then it was just the stand part, like to be an active listener and to say, what, this may be a problem that maybe we're not addressing, or maybe we know about, but we're not really doing something about it. So then to go to the speak phase, I started to talk about this with my attendings and clerkship directors that I work with, and kind of sort of ask them a little bit about, is there a part in the clinical grade that give a leeway between people who are very outspoken, people on the team who always are answering questions loudly, versus the other students who may be more introverted, not really talk a lot, shy, or speak softly. And they said, we really don't have a good answer for you. So then I started talking to my colleagues to speak more about the topic. And some of them were like, oh yeah, like that's expected. But others were like, yeah, that's true. That never kind of came across our mind, but that is very true, that some people are at a disadvantage in clinical rotations. So then a colleague of mine, the other colleague who was really interested in this, we both saw the call to the letter to the editor, and we decided to write that up. So that was the ACT part of Stand, Speak, and Act. So we came together and we both kind of jotted down ideas, and it was a lot to talk about, but due to the limitation in words, we just had to kind of narrow it down to 3 main ideas and bring it all together. And then we wanted someone to kind of be a mentor for us. So we reached out to Dr. Sanchez, who was our faculty advisor, and he told us, it's a good idea. You should go ahead and write it. And we submitted it, and it went through. So it was, I didn't know back then that's how, the process of writing a letter goes, or to voice your concern, but it kind of just unrevealed itself. And it was such a pleasurable and great experience, and I'm glad that it went through. So that's my experience. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to chat it in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer that. Thanks. I guess, Max, if you want to go next.
Sorry, I was having a hard time figuring out how to unmute. I hope people can hear me. So yeah, my name is Max. I am a third year now here at EL. And I too had the opportunity to publish a letter to the editor in Academic Medicine. And the title of my letter was The Pictures on the Wall, Transitioning from a Historically Black College/University to an Ivy League Medical School. So a little bit of background. So I went to Howard University for undergrad, and in between Howard and coming to medical school, I spent 3 years, 2 of which I did a master's in bioengineering at Georgia Tech and then worked at Vanderbilt. But the sort of big stark difference I was referencing in my letter was about the differences between Howard and EL. So first of all, the way I heard about this call was like the day before it was due. So I had to write the essay like that same night. But basically I wrote about my experience just sort of witnessing what are the pictures on the walls here at EL versus at other institutions, and specifically at Howard, where I went to undergrad. So like when I was at Howard, the pictures in the administration's building were pictures of recent graduates or current students that may have been awarded, like, I don't know, a Fulbright fellowship or like a Rhodes Fellowships, sort of celebrating, quote unquote, the excellence and academic prowess of students. And I personally felt inspired by that as a freshman, to sort of see the things that people 2-3 years ahead of me are doing. Whereas, so then coming to Yale, the pictures on the walls are like, pictures of physicians from like, I don't know, the 800s. And very starkly, they're all old, white, male individuals who went to medical school at a time where Black people couldn't go to medical school. And that I felt was a sort of backdrop behind what the experience of being a Black male medical student at an Ivy League medical school was, for me at least. So sort of experiencing, doubt from peers, or even the occasional faculty person, or quote unquote not feeling like I belong because I didn't necessarily feel included in a lot of, I don't know, social activities, or that my voice was valued in some settings like small workshops or even in group social settings. And so that's basically what I wrote about, and also wrote about, brought up the fears or concerns that I had, because when I was writing that, I was sort of on the verge of starting my clinical year. We start clerkships here during second year. So I had these experiences as a pre-clerkship student where I didn't necessarily feel as though I was valued, or that people believed or trusted that I belonged there, or that I was meant to do well here. And was concerned, like, oh, what's it going to be like in clerkships? Because as a medical student, on your clerkship experience, you're sort of always being evaluated. And there's plenty of studies out there that show, right, that like, racial and ethnic minorities are at a disadvantage when you look at clerkship sort of commentary in like MSPE, specifically Black men. And it also shows that there exists like gender discrimination appear in clerkship commentary when you look at MSP letters. Anyways, so those were sort of the fears that I had. And lastly, in the letter, I commented on the things that made me sort of, persist throughout, because there had been times where I was like, it would have been a lot easier socially to just go to Howard for medical school because I was choosing between Howard and Yale. But overall, thinking about the ways in which I built a system of support, within the medical school, but also beyond the medical school, of people that understand and support me and I can sort of rely on when I'm in need. But also thinking about, the long-term advantages of going here for medical school. And, so I felt that those ultimately will hopefully trump the drawbacks, I guess. So that was what my letter was about. And since then, before then, I've been writing a lot more. I started a column in the In Training Medical magazine, where I sort of expound on this whole physical environment, pictures on the wall notion, like who gets canonized through imagery and portraiture. So that's sort of my experience with the process of writing an essay / a letter to the editor in academic medicine. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions about writing as a medical student, that writing that isn't necessarily about research, or even that, how to respond to art. Because most recently I just got a letter to the editor approved in the Journal of Thoracic, Annals of Thoracic Surgery, another letter to the editor, but sort of responding to letters, responding to publications that are referring to studies. And if anyone's interested in talking more about medical journalism, I'm also happy to chat about that. So, yeah.
Excellent. So this is Dr. Sanchez. Again, I just want to congratulate and thank both Lama and Max for sharing their perspective and being so dedicated to both of the issues that they've commented on. We're going to move into the question and answer segment. And as mentioned by both Lama and Max, please note any questions in the question box. I see one of the questions is, will the slides be made available? Yes, the slides will be made available, and we will also release this tape so that individuals can also share it with colleagues and friends. Mary Beth, can you answer the question, is it possible for undergrads and post-bac students to publish at Academic Medicine or within the Journal of Academic Medicine? And how have you seen that play out?
Sure. So I actually don't have a lot of examples. I don't know if I have any examples of undergrads or post-bacs publishing in academic medicine, but that is not to say that it's impossible. There's no restriction on who can submit something for consideration. I think something like the student resident letters to the editor series is a really good opportunity, just because the person isn't necessarily a medical student already. We would not disqualify them. I mean, it's, someone who's an undergrad or post-bac student, that's certainly within the spirit of this feature. I would say also some of the humanities features that I called out earlier, our teaching and learning moments, medicine and the arts, cover art, things like that. Those are also really good sort of gateway vehicles. You know, if you are perhaps, you know, already a writer, kind of reflecting on your experience, you know, as a pre-med, or how it, you know, applying to medical schools or preparing for applications to medical schools, things like that. Those things are all related to the mission of the journal. So we would be happy to consider them.
Excellent. One of the questions that an individual put forth on the survey, I would like to pose to Lama and Max. How did you go about finding mentors during medical school? And how do you balance that search and that relationship while managing your academic pursuits?
Sorry, I was muted there. So I was really fortunate that I have an academic advisor who I feel can mentor me beyond just sort of meeting the milestones of, I guess, traveling through medical school. And part was through going to a conference. I mean, I went to the Beyond Flexner conference, which is a social medicine focused conference. And I met her there first, and she just happened to be my academic advisor. And she's been a great mentor to me, although busy. And then the other thing that I've done is sort of reaching out to people who have published work in areas that I'm interested in, and see whether, you know, there's a commonality there, and whether there are projects that we could potentially work on together, or what type of advice I could get from them. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean like taking on a full research project, but just sort of like, for example, I have a mentor here who I've helped just like cleaning data for, you know, for a big study that he was doing, or helping him disseminate a survey. Just small things that, you know, that can help sort of create a bond with the mentor in question. And I feel that I've moved with quite a few of my mentors, that we have been able to move past the level of just simply, you know, working on a research project or working on the paper together, but also I feel more able to sort of, you know, talk to them about somewhat more personal aspects of dealing with medical school. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, thank you, Max. I think it resonates a lot with my experience. And I think there's two types of mentors that I've encountered in medical school. The first one is, you know, like someone that I've met through opportunities, whether it's through my school or through going to a conference, and that's how I met them. And it's someone who does, you know, either research or has a position that I'm interested in, and reaching out to them. And I think to answer the question is, I will say something that I wish someone had told me when I started medical school, is not to be shy or not to hesitate to reach out to others, because I felt like I would bother a professor or an attending if I reached out to them saying, hey, can we meet? And I would be hesitant to email someone, but sometimes all it takes is an email, and people sometimes feel flattered, or they really take it as a compliment when people reach out to be their mentors. And that's all I had to add.
I think following up to that question, Max and Lama, can you address a question that was posed? How can faculty members best support trainee scholarship via letter of the editor? I know both of you have commented on it, but any additional suggestions on what you think would help other trainees?
I mean, one thing that I want to say is if your letter is something that you're passionate about, but that's not necessarily in your field, like to give an example, I'm going into obstetrics and gynecology, but my letter has nothing to do with obstetrics and gynecology per se. So having different faculty mentors for different things. So when I had to go to someone to talk about, you know, the letter and what advice do you have for me, I had to choose a faculty advisor who is invested in student wellness and in clinical rotation. So it had to be someone, you know, outside of the OBGYN department. And I think finding that faculty member and to say, hey, I have a letter ready to go. I just need your input on this. Can you please help me out? Is half the battle.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add about that.
Mary Beth, can I ask you, I think you mentioned that for this particular call in August, faculty cannot be co-authors, which, you know, for some faculty may be a surprise. Are students allowed to recognize faculty who helped them in an acknowledgement section?
Yes.
Or how is that?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's really important. So because we want to make sure to feature student and resident voices, we do ask that the letters be authored solely by students and residents or residents. However, we recognize the very important role that faculty mentors play, especially at this stage in your career. So we don't mean that you can't work with faculty members, but they should not be playing a role of an author and, you know, doing the work of an author on this letter. But, you know, to recognize them, each letter that's published has a section at the end where you can include any conflicts of interest or funding, and also, importantly, acknowledgments to those who have contributed to the letter but do not meet authorship criteria. So and that would be a very appropriate thing to do, to recognize the input of your faculty mentor in that section.
Excellent. Another question for you, Mary Beth. Can letters to the editor at all have a figure? Not novel data, but a new presentation
Right.
of existing data?
So in our journal, no. Now that's going to be something that's different from journal to journal. So, you know, if you have something that, you know, is appropriate for another journal, you might want to look at their criteria for submission. And I think a lot of journals actually do include exhibits like figures and tables, but in academic medicine, we do not have them ever.
And I think Max mentioned that he has an upcoming acceptance or submission. But maybe the both of you, Mary Beth and Max, can you address the question of what is the best way to be able to choose an appropriate publication to reply to in a letter?
Mm-hmm. Max, why don't you kind of answer from an authorship perspective, and then I can answer from someone who kind of looks at submitted letters to the editor and helps make decisions about what gets published.
Sure. So I'd say there are two things. The first one, for example, you know, some specific journals will have like a call like Academic Medicine did, asking for letters to the editor. I think just about every journal sort of has these solicited asks for people to submit, say, if there's a hot topic like the opioid epidemic right now, I'm sure there's a journal out there that is asking for experts to contribute or sort of share their viewpoint on ways to address the epidemic. You know, Academic Medicine's this time was this specific opportunity that I had was about transitions, and I stumbled upon it. The other aspect of it is if you have a very specific expertise and happen to say read a lot of papers in that area and feel as though those that we come across needs a response from you, that's a good way to say, well, I'm going to write a letter about. So I'll use an example. There's a study that was recently published coming out of Kentucky that I read, and I said, well, this is what my research is about exactly. And so that's what prompted me to write a letter responding to this specific paper. The third thing I was going to say is kind of taking a look at what the journals tend to publish is useful. So for example, you know, if, I don't know, JAMA Internal Medicine tends to publish letters or perspective essays from students that are, you know, very specific about, I'm making this up, say the experience on the collection, then maybe JAMA Internal Medicine is somewhere to consider writing your letter to the editor or your perspective piece about your experience on the collection. Just kind of looking at patterns, I think would potentially be useful. Yeah, those are the three tips I guess I have.
And I would say from the sort of decision-making perspective, the most successful letters, like I said, are the ones that kind of that 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 you really feel passionately about. I mean, if it's something that you think you should write about, it's not going to be as effective as if it's something you really want to write about. So, I would say if you stumble on an article, it doesn't really matter what the topic is, but if you react to it in some way and feel really strongly, those make really good letters. And like I said, especially if you can feature your unique perspective as a learner, adding to that conversation. We're not that concerned about which conversation gets represented. It's more about are you adding to a conversation with your letter? So it's probably not a very helpful answer, but I hope it does communicate that we're not looking for specific topics for letters to the editor. We're in general, we're really just looking for effective, ways to add to the conversation.
Excellent. Well, in the interest of time, I just want to thank everyone again for participating in today's webinar. I'm just going to ask Lama for assistance in moving the slide over, if that's possible, to the next slide. Great. So I want to thank again Mary Beth, Lama, and Max for co-presenting on this topic matter, and congratulations again to Max and Lama. I hope that you will continue to submit, especially with the upcoming call. And I wish you all the very best success as you consider becoming future faculty or a future leader in particular, or especially a dean. Some of the upcoming innovations through BingGap that I want to share with everyone is we hope to organize the next webinar on writing a perspective or commentary, and we're looking to have that organized for August. BingGap will also be offering a seminar titled Critical Transition Seminar, Finding Your Academic Residency, Fellowship, or First Academic Position at CUNY School of Medicine in Manhattan, New York City on September 8th. This seminar is for medical students in their final year as they decide on a residency program, residents who are applying for fellowship, or graduating residents or fellows applying for their first academic position. And it really goes to provide advice from senior leaders at medical centers in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut on how do you negotiate contracts, how do you comport yourself and have successful interviews, how do you modify your portfolio, and so forth. And as many of you know, BingGap offers a number of academic medicine career development regional conferences. There'll be 5 in the fall, and the first site will be George Washington University School of Medicine on September 21st and 22nd, Albany Medical College, September 28th and 29th, Loyola, October 19th and 20th in Chicago. Baylor will also be that weekend of October 19th and 20th, and Albert Einstein College of Medicine will be sometime in November, December. And please register at www.binggap.org so that we can remain in contact with you. Thank you everyone again, and have a great evening. Take care.